All right.
Give me just a
Okay,
few
see
minutes. Yeah, it's
Okay.
almost ready. It's starting to. Sometimes it takes YouTube a minute to wake up.
Don't mute yourself till you tell me you're ready to go.
Fair enough. All right, we are good to go. It's all, Frank, if you'd like to introduce Gregg, and then Gregg, we'll let you take it away.
Sounds good.
Frank, you may have to unmute yourself.
He's gone off to the fridge.
We did.
Get another beer.
In that case,
You can unmute him.
I can if I can find him.
Yeah. See. No, I can't.
Yeah, I don't know where he went. That's okay. You know what? I'm going to introduce Gregg. Hello and welcome to the April 2023 meeting of the HAS, Houston Archeological Society. We are, I'm Sarah Chesney, I'm the vice president. I welcome you all here, and I am here to introduce very briefly Dr. Gregg Dimmick, who has been a longtime HAS member and avocational archaeologist, focused particularly on battlefield recovery, especially related to the Texas Revolution and the Mexican Army in the Texas Revolution. Tonight, he is going to present on the archaeology of San Jacinto and the Almonte surrender site. Gregg, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I thought I should probably explain how in the world a pediatrician ends up doing archaeology at San Jacinto. So I'm going to tell briefly how the story came about. I had discovered the Mexican Army artifacts in the Sea of Mud, and Houston Archeological Society had helped me excavate that. And we have a couple of publications from HAS on the Sea of Mud. We found thousands of Mexican Army artifacts, and I was giving a talk in San Antonio to the Alamo Society, and a lady came up from San Jacinto and asked me if I would be interested in meeting with them about possible archaeology at San Jacinto. And of course, I said, sure, I would love to see if there's anything at San Jacinto. We had the meeting with her and the director of the site and some members of the San Jacinto Battleground Association. For a while, we were called the Conservancy. Now we're the association again. But we had a meeting, and basically what they told me is they said, we don't think there's anything here because souvenir hunters came out here for years after the battle and picked things up. And also back in the 50s, they said it was legal to metal detect on the site. So metal detecting had been done, but they still wanted to know if there was anything there. I told them that my opinion was, and now I'm not advancing here. I don't know what to do. There we go. Okay. I told them my opinion was that the big stuff may be gone, but the little stuff should still be there. It was very muddy that April, thus the Sea of Mud. But I told them, musket balls and small items and everything, buttons and stuff should still be there. So they decided to let us do a field survey, and they asked me to contact some of my metal detecting friends. And this is the group that we got together in October of 2002. And we did metal detecting mostly on Peggy Lake, the banks of Peggy Lake, but a little bit on the battleground itself inside the park. And we found stuff. We found mostly small things. The upper left is a cartridge box buckle, and the upper right is a trigger guard, probably from a pistol. I have a laser pointer here. Let me turn that on. This is a button, and it's an officer's button, and you can see the Mexican eagle with the snake in its mouth. And this is interesting. It's hard to see, but this is an officer's spoon. This is the end of the handle of a spoon, and there's an eagle on there. You can see the claws down here at the bottom, but it's hard to see the rest. Since we found stuff, they decided they needed to get it more official. So they called in Dr. Roger Moore, who's on the left, and he's showing a musket ball that we found out here. It was very interesting. The first day out, they had marked off a 60 by 60 square, and there were about 20 lanes, and I assigned the metal detectorists to certain lanes. And the illustrator for my book, who's an architect, and he's also a big metal detectorist, Manuel Hinojosa, assigned him to lane 1. And we didn't know it at the time, but the archaeologists had, at Roger's group, had bought a metal detector and had already metal detected lane 1. And they found a couple of beer cans in lane 1, but nothing else. And I sent Manuel to lane 1, and he found 5 musket balls in lane 1. So I think it became apparent to them right away that they needed our expertise, that we had better machines than they did, and we had a lot of expertise using it. The picture on the right, these two guys, this guy right here is one of my metal detectorists, and this guy right here drove in. I actually noticed him driving in that morning to the excavation, to the dig, and that's Sam Houston IV. It was really surrealistic, metal detecting the Battle of San Jacinto with Sam Houston IV right there watching us, and we were finding stuff. This is one of the maps of where we did it. This is not the first day, but they use total station laser, which I'm told is accurate to within a few centimeters when you're marking an artifact. The yellow dots on this are the historical metals, and the blue dots are battle related. These are things, the blue dots are things that we knew were from the Battle of San Jacinto. There wasn't any doubt about that. So it turns out I was right. There were still artifacts there. Just to show you how tough we were, this is one day we were out near the monument, and there was a small tornado that passed by, but we kept digging. It didn't look like it was going to cause us any trouble. It wasn't headed toward us. So we were dedicated workers. Some of the small artifacts we found on the battle site, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We found a lot more artifacts than I'm going to show you tonight. But once again, this is another eagle button, probably for an officer, and this is the size that probably would have been a cuff button to go on a cuff of a uniform. Now, I was wrong about only finding small stuff. We found big stuff too. This is a bayonet from an India pattern brown bess musket, and we found it right out in front of where the Mexican breastworks supposedly were. That was one of our goals, was to find out where the Mexican breastworks were. We found some silver coins. We don't know for sure that this is from the battle, but it likely is. 1808. I think this is a half real coin. This was a fascinating find for us. I don't know if you can see it, but I can point it out right here. We found this artifact, and it was face down, so we didn't know which unit it was from, but we knew it was a crossed belt plate. The Mexican army had leather straps that crossed their chest, just like the French. And so one of those straps was the cartridge box, and the other one was the bayonet scabbard. And where they crossed, they would put a plate, and you can see 2 little attachments on the back, and they would attach it to keep those 2 straps in place. And so we were all excited to find out what unit this was from. This is after we got it out, and it's kind of hard to see on this one. I'm going to show you a better picture of it later, but this is B, G, and then you can't see it, but right down here is the little O, and that's Battalion Guerrero. And it was really interesting that we found that where we found it. I tell people, archaeology isn't just what you find, it's where you find it. And to me, this is a classic example of archaeology changing the history of the battle. The history of the battle was that General Cos, who was one of the Mexican commanders, came in on the day of the battle, which is true, and he brought about 500 men. That's true. And the Texas history books will tell you he camped on the Mexican right, on their right flank, and he had been marching all day long.
There's no
and his
sound at
troops-
all coming from it.
Well, I have sound, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Greg.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought they said there's no sound.
Yeah,
at
I heard
all.
that too, but I think
Yeah.
you're good. It's occasionally
Okay.
cutting out, which is probably just internet.
Yeah,
Okay.
just a
okay.
delay.
Anyway, Texas history says that Cos camped on the Mexican right flank, and that's where the Texans originally attacked. And because his troops were asleep and exhausted, they ran through the Mexican camp and totally disrupted the organization of the Mexican army. And I believe that. I mean, there was no reason not to believe it. But we found that chest plate. We found it out near where it says Sam Houston was wounded. And it's interesting because Santa Anna, oh, by the way, I should read this slide. The Guerrero Battalion had 8 companies. 2 of them were preferential companies, and they came with Santa Anna. So they were already in the main Mexican camp. And the rest of the Guerrero came with Cos on the day of the battle. And this was the regular infantry companies. And they were the ones that were said to be camped over on the Mexican right. Santa Anna, oh, this is a picture of the plate cleaned up, by the way. Santa Anna's manifesto, he wrote that there was an attack column under orders of Cespedes, who it was composed of the Guerrero Battalion and detachment of the Toluca and the Guadalajara. And he said, along with the column of Colonel Luelma, and he had some preferential companies, they marched to check the advance of the enemy. The 2 columns were dispersed. Cespedes was wounded and Luelma was killed. Now, based on what I knew about the Guerrero Battalion and the fact that they came in with Coast and would have been camped over on the Mexican right, as Texas history books said, I thought that Santa Anna was making this up. It's like if they're camped way over on the right, he's not going to be able to communicate with them. He's not going to be able to talk to their commander, Cespedes, and he's not going to organize a counterattack. So I had just assumed that this was one of Santa Anna's stories that he told to make himself look better, that there was a counterattack. So I never believed there was a counterattack. But then I was stuck with the fact that we found a Guerrero Battalion plate out in front of the Mexican breastworks, quite a ways out in front. It was right near where the monument is that said Sam Houston was wounded here. So I decided I better do a little bit more research, and I found in one of General Filosola's book, I found a quote from Cespedes, and he said those columns were destroyed by the accurate fire of the enemy. And he said Peralta and his command staff and many of the soldiers were killed on the battlefield. The rest were wounded or prisoners. And he said the entire force under my command was lost, and I found myself gravely wounded in the left arm. So Cespedes is saying there was a counterattack. and he led it. So that led me to further research about where Costas troops camped. And indeed, they camped near the main army is what I could come up with from the Mexican military records. I also found Céspedes' military records, and it reported that he led an attack column at San Jacinto and was severely wounded. I read somewhere that his left arm never worked again. It was useless after he was wounded in the left arm. So this to me was a perfect example of archaeology not only defining what happened and reinforcing what happened, but it changed, in my opinion, the flow of the battle. If you're going to write the flow of the battle, you've got to have the counterattack in. We found some other fascinating articles. This is a French horn, and this was the emblem, and this probably would have been on a cartridge box pouch, a cartridge box flap. This was the French horn, and this was worn by the cazadores, the light infantry. And it was amazing to me that we were finding all this stuff when nobody believed there was anything left. One of my favorite finds, and I look a little younger here, one of my favorite finds was a 8 real coin. And we found it not too far from that marker where Sam Houston was working. Right, you can see it was right underneath this brush that we found it. The story is that the Texans, when they captured Santa Anna's, there was supposedly 12,000 of these coins. They're 8 real coins. They're about the size of a silver dollar. The Texans counted them several times, apparently, and supposedly by the time they finished counting them, there were about 8,000. There were supposed to be 12,000, but some of them were missing. Well, we found one that was missing. We don't think probably 4,000 of them got dropped. But once again, this is archaeology telling the history of what happened. You can see right down here that the date is 1834. And if you look over here, it says Z and S, and that's Zacatecas. And in May of 1835, Santa Anna was in the state of Zacatecas, putting down a revolt, just like he came later to Texas to put down a revolt. But Zacatecas was a silver mining state, and they had a lot of silver, and he confiscated that silver and used it to help pay for the Texas Revolution. So to me, this was really fascinating. It just totally fits the history of what was going on. This is the back side of the coin. You can see what good shape it was in. It was amazing how nice the coin came out after all these years. This was an interesting artifact that we found, and we found it out in front of the Mexican breastworks, but not very far out in front. And when we first found this, we were going to label this as historic metal. And then somebody, and I don't actually recall, said, what are these dimples on it? You can see there's a dimple there, there's a dimple here, there's a dimple up here. And we finally realized what this was probably the end of a canister shot. And we had found several cans of canister in the Mexican army, the Sea of Mud, in the stuff they lost and dropped. And they weren't anything like this type of canister. And based on the size of this iron end to a canister and the type of canister it was, we're pretty comfortable that this was from the Texans, from one of the twin sisters. And it does, the size of it tells us that the twin sisters probably were 6-pounders. There's a big argument whether they were 4-pounders or 6-pounders, but I think this is very good evidence that they were probably 6-pounders. So this is the end of a canister shot from one of the twin sisters. This was another fascinating artifact that we found. They did send some of the lead to, I think it was Arizona State. It could have been the University of Arizona. and they did isotopic studies, and they tried to find out where the different lead was from. They found out that the lead the Texans used was from the Missouri Valley, and it makes sense because Moses Austin had come from the Missouri Valley, and he was in the lead mining business. So apparently he was dealing with the Texans, or his family was. He was dead at the time, but his family was shipping lead to Texas still. The Mexican lead was, they can't specifically say in where in Mexico, but it was consistently from Mexico. So they found out this musket ball is Mexican lead. And they also found out, well, we already knew that the size of this musket ball is the size the Mexicans used. They had 75 caliber East India pattern British muskets. And the Texans pretty much didn't use any of those, just what they had captured. But this is almost for sure a Mexican Army musket ball. We had a lot of these musket balls evaluated by Dr. Doug Scott. I say that Roger Moore's group, that Moore and Company had them evaluated by Dr. Doug Scott at the University of Nebraska. He's the one that did the ballistics for the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he wasn't obviously able to do rifling on these because they were smooth bore muskets, but he was able to identify some of them that were ramrodded by the same ramrod. And I think that was fascinating. He gave us a report, and they sent me a copy, and I emailed him and asked him, what is this inclusion right here? And he emailed me back and said, that's a rock. And I emailed him back and asked him to take another look at it. And I said, there aren't any rocks at San Jacinto. And so he looked at it again, and he emailed me back, and he said, you're right, that's bone. And if that's a Mexican ball, I think there were 7 or 8 Texans killed and 22 wounded or so. So about 30 Texas casualties. And it's fascinating to think about the fact that one of those was Sam Houston. So I always tell everybody that there's a 1 in 30 chance that we found the part of Sam Houston's ankle bone. He ended up being wounded so seriously, he had to go to New Orleans and have surgery. Someday I'm sure they can do some DNA on that piece of bone and find out. I'm sure there are a lot of relatives of several of the men that were killed or wounded there, and maybe they could identify which family that bone is from. We found a lead shot that was pretty mangled. And this obviously hit something. This is more the size of a Texas musket ball. We coincidentally just digging a hole, because metal detectors aren't going to find flint, but we found a musket flint that was dropped, and we found it when we were digging something metal. I believe that this dark flint is English. I know there's a dark flint and a light flint, and one of them's English and one of them's French. So I think they could identify this as English. Now, we got rumors that there was another site about 2 miles, I believe, southwest of the San Jacinto Battleground, not exactly on Peggy Lake, but it was a little further west of Peggy Lake. And we applied for a grant. The San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy applied for a grant. And this distinguished group of people, this is when we were out doing archaeology at that site. We got a grant from the National Battlefield Association. You can see some familiar faces here. We have a Texas congressman here. We have a just recently moved president of the Houston Archeological Society. We have some other folks that unfortunately are no longer with us, but it was amazing to do this site. We had no idea what we were going to find there. It was a kind of a shot in the dark, but we've been told that stuff had been found in that area. You can tell that the conditions were bad. We had to get one of those, I forget what they call them now, a brush whacker or something like that. And we had to make lanes through there. This is Roger Moore and I cleaning up some of the branches that they had cut, but we couldn't excavate the whole site. We just had to excavate lanes, clear lanes, and we metal detected those lanes. It was interesting because we started finding a bunch of artifacts. One of the main artifacts that we found were bayonets. And so we found several bayonets. We found artifacts from different units. We found musket balls. This says D8, and that's dragoons. That's a cavalry button. These are chin strap shingles from a chin strap from a Mexican Army helmet. And this is an exploding bomb from the Grenadiers. So there was a wide variety of different units and troops that we found here. We found something from the Guerrero Battalion. This is a picture in the background, and we took some of the fragments and placed them on top, and it matched really exactly as to, and there's a G on there suggestive of Guerrero. We're almost sure that's from the Guerrero Battalion. One of the most fascinating things that we found here was that the artifacts were in a line. It was a linear feature. It was NRG property at the time. It's now been purchased and is in the process of being given to the state or sold to the state. I'm not sure which, but we found this line of artifacts, and we were trying to decide if it was a tree line or whether it was a road. There was no evidence of a road. There wasn't any evidence that it was a tree line. And somebody finally said, hey, how about, could this be where Almonte surrendered? Almonte was one of Santa Anna's aides, and he had about, probably 300 or 400 men that he had brought into the woods with him. And we found documentation that he lined them up and he told them to disarm, throw down everything that could be considered offensive. We found groups of musket balls, like they had thrown all their musket balls out of their cartridge box. We found groups of those. We found the bayonets. We found other things. And we think that they just threw down anything. We didn't find swords or muskets because we think they had already dropped in. They'd been running for a mile or two before he got them to form up. He marched them out and surrendered. And most of the Texans were just killing anybody that tried to surrender. But there was like 300 or 400, and there were only 8 cavalrymen right nearby. So I think those cavalrymen were smart enough not to try to kill 300 or 400 of them, and they accepted their surrender. So we're pretty sure that's the Almonte surrender site. We did get to have one other excavation. It was only a 2-day excavation, and we were in the Texan camp. We did find a few Mexican Army artifacts there, and I'm pretty sure that's where the prisoners were kept. The history books tell us that's the case. But we found a little brass buckle. We found a stirrup. We didn't find anything that was definitely Texas Army, but I think these are likely to be. The Texans didn't have much diagnostic stuff, so I think that we weren't as likely to find stuff in the Texan camp. All right. I don't know if there are any questions, if we want to take questions now.
Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions if you would like.
Hey, Greg, regarding the Almonte site, now, was that, what I read on that after the fact, obviously, I was not involved with this. But did Roger Moore do a lot of research on that and lead you guys to that? Or did he do his research after you guys went and did the metal detecting there?
Actually, it wasn't through Roger. It was one. I think it might have been Jan Duvall, but one of the and I hate to call them that, but like pot hunters or the metal detectorists that were that lived in the area. He's the one that told us there are artifacts down there.
Okay.
And I don't know if he had found any, but he knew people that had found them. So they're the ones that led it to us. And the San Jacinto Battleground Conservatory, we're the ones that applied for the grant. And then once we got the grant, we got Roger Moore involved. So it was word of mouth is how we ended up on that site. We had no idea that it was the Almonte surrender site. We were just told there were artifacts there.
Yeah, I read something somewhere, and I it's been 5 years. You remember when we were there in the fall of 2017 over on the what was the NRG property? I think Energy Partners owns it now, and we were doing that
Right.
pipeline
We went
right
back.
away. Yeah, the
Right.
pipeline right away and all that.
Right.
But somebody had done some research on it, and they used the Tobin aerial photography pictures from way back when, like the 1930s, because Almonte had written that he was behind a stand of oak trees when he had his troops drop all their stuff, and they marched out, 5 abreast with a white flag and surrendered to the Texans, as you stated. Interesting, 50 years after the battle, they had a reunion down there, and a Houston newspaper, not the Chronicle, maybe the old Houston Post or somebody like that, was questioning a bunch of the veterans as to the site where Almonte's troops surrendered. And they were all picking Peggy Lake as the place where it happened.
Yeah.
And then you guys go and find all these artifacts, like you said, 2 miles away. So that's interesting. Again, where the archaeology shows the true place of the surrender, whereas the guys during the heat of the battle, who are not exactly taking landmarks as they're fighting,
Right.
we're talking about, no, what happened over here, and it's such a distance away. That's really interesting. So
there are several Mexican accounts that talk about them, the Mexican soldiers fleeing into a motte of trees, which was just like you said, kind of an island of trees, and they fled into there and were hiding there. Obviously, some of them jumped into Peggy Lake, but a lot of them went into this grove of trees, and now we know where it was.
And for those of you that never talked to Linda Gorski about her participation there at the Almonte surrender site, she will tell you that the greatest day of her life was not when her children were born, not when she got married, but when she found an 18-inch Mexican bayonet with Gregg Dimmick and Charlie Gordy and the gang down there.
So Greg, were you with us when we did some metal detecting maybe 5 or 6 years ago? And we found a line of a cluster of musket balls. I think you may have been there. I think it was on energy.
Yes.
It was the fall of 17, Bob. Yes.
Was it
Yeah,
17?
Greg was with us.
You were with us.
It was for that pipeline. And some of those musket balls, I think, were from the Almonte site. They were on the edge of it.
Yeah, but we found it. We must have found 30 musket balls or something in little pockets down the line.
If you remember,
Bob,
Bob,
those
where Greg and them had done. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say that the Mexican soldiers in their cartridge boxes, they would carry what they called Paratus of bullets, the musket balls. And it was paper cartridges, and they would have about 10 or 12 in a in a circle, and they would have them tied together. And so when we were finding those musket balls at the Almonte site and on that right of way, we were finding them in clumps, like 8 or 10 in one spot. And they were obviously dropped. They hadn't been fired, which was very consistent with the fact that Almonte told them to disarm, throw away their bullets. They threw them all on the ground, and we found those clusters of them.
I mean, that was really cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is
Yes,
there
sir.
a marker now at the Almonte site?
There is not, but I'm sure it's going to be developed. Hopefully more archaeology is going to be done there.
Okay.
But the Texas Historical Commission is running San Jacinto now, and the head of the Texas Historical Commission purchased the land. He apparently has plenty of money. He purchased it from NRG, and they're in the process of getting it over to the state. And I think they want to develop it and maybe have paths that go down there. And it wouldn't surprise me if they have a marker there. I mean, I'm sure they will.
So you're
They'll
saying
have
John now has actually purchased it personally?
Yes.
So,
Which was
One of
really
the,
good of him to do that.
Yeah.
so Greg,
And Dyer, one of the issues with where Greg and them were metal detecting down there, and we ran into it a little bit when we were doing that pipeline right away. There's a line of power lines, the big girders with the big power lines on there. You cannot metal detect there. It will totally screw up your metal. I mean, all you get is a buzz. So it's possible that there can be a lot of artifacts right in that electrical right of way. And, unless you go in there and do a line of either units or STPs, you're not going to find any of that stuff. Now, where we were doing the right of way in 2017, we were approximately 80 to 100 yards from where I think Greg and them had maybe ended their lane that they were allowed to excavate in back in 2009 or whenever it was. And there was a stretch of woods there, maybe about 75 yards wide. We were not allowed to go in there and to metal detect, even though we wanted to. We knew there was probably stuff in there because we're finding stuff in the right of way. And then Greg and them had been 75 yards away. It's like, what about the area in between? And we had talked about maybe seeing if we could get approval to go in there at some point. And here it is 6 years later, and that hasn't happened. But if the park is going to get it, who knows? In the future, that could be another possibility. So.
okay, so where is this Almonte surrender site in relation to that right of way that had those electrical transmission lines? Because I can remember, Greg, going out there back even when Sheldon and Kendall was still involved, and we worked with you and your group in that area. Where is the Almonte site in relation to that?
There's a couple of different lines, power lines. The one that goes all the way up to the park, that main one, the big one, the Almonte site basically goes right up to that main one that goes all the way from the park down to one of the industrial complexes down there. There's another one that's smaller and further west of that one, and it kind of runs parallel. And I think the Almonte, that's the one we were working near there for a pipeline that was going to go basically 90 degrees from the right of way. So I think that the Almonte site stretches from that main one to that other easement all the way. I mean, 300 or 400 troops is going to, lining up is going to be a pretty long line.
Yeah. Okay.
Through the when I was researching it later after we were there in 2017, where Greg and them went in 2009 and found all those artifacts was west of the power lines
Right.
And we were further west of that, like I said, maybe about 100 yards, I'm gonna guess, if we include that stretch of woods. But where Bob was talking about us finding musket balls, and if anybody can see this, it's gonna be really messed up because of my camera here. This is a piece of copper that Greg, I think I found this one, and I think maybe Greg found another one. They were right side by side. Can you see that little feathering on it there? Okay. And let me see if I can find the picture. This is where it came from. It's from a headdress from a Mexican cavalryman's.
Oh, cool.
See the feathers, the eagle feathers up there?
Cool.
Now, why it's so messed up, I don't know. You know, maybe some kids were taking pot shots at it at a later date, or I don't know if they did any farming there and if a plow went through there or whatever. But where we found that and the musket balls that Bob had previously talked about in 2017, it was lined up perfectly with that corridor that Greg and them had done earlier, 8 or 9 years earlier. So
Okay.
again, you know, like all those guys were back there dropping all their stuff, and however many hundred there were, you know, they marched out abreast with a white flag, and, you know, lucky for them, they got their surrender taken. Any other questions from y'all out there? It's an interesting subject, really is.
Is there anything in
I don't have
chat?
a question, but I'd love to just make a plug for those of you who are aware of the dates. We are currently, you know, right on the eve of the anniversary of the battle, and if you are interested, you should head down to San Jacinto on Saturday. There's a battle reenactment. There's a whole bunch of activities and stuff going on. It should be pretty nuts, but they usually put on a pretty good show. So if that's something you're interested in seeing, you should definitely check it out this weekend.
Okay, good plug.
And by the way,
I'm going to
thanks
be
Greg
tied
and
up
Bob.
working with
No.
a professional archaeology. I'm going to be tied up working with a professional archaeology group in Goliad, but I can't give any details. So they're doing some excavations in
We know who
Goliad
it
at
is,
some
Greg.
very interesting sites. So
That
And
Greg,
sounds
we
like
know,
a
we
future
know who
talk.
it is. We know who it is.
Hey, Greg, now that we're doing plugs,
They've
tell us
sworn
about your new
they've
book.
sworn us to secrecy until we're done. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But we know we know where you
I've
are
got
and who
a
you're with.
3-volume book that I've written. Yeah, okay. But it didn't come from me. I've got a 3-volume book that I've written on the Mexican army. It's going to be called Santa Anna's Army in the Texas Revolution. And volume 1 is supposedly going to be out by January. They've been putting this off for a long time. Apparently COVID hit the publication industry very hard. And so, but they say it's going to be out by January, volume 1. It'll be 1835. And then volume 2 is going to include the Alamo and Goliad. And volume 3 will be San Jacinto and the aftermath. But I've already written all 3 volumes, but one of these days it's going to be published, and I'm excited about it. There's a lot of documents in it that are from the Mexican military archives that have never been seen before. And obviously, if they haven't been seen, they haven't been translated. So we got them translated. And I think I found 2,000 documents, and I think the 3 volumes, I used about 100 or 120 of the 2,000 documents that I found.
As a teaser, can you tell us if you did any metal detecting, let's say southwest of San Antonio on the approaches in toward the Alamo, or anything new, or is this older technology? Or
The only work we've done there is trying to find the Battle of Medina.
right?
And that
That's
was
what I was leading
1813.
towards. Yeah.
Yes. And I've not done any lately. It was years ago. I know they've been working on it a lot. I'm still not convinced they found the site based
Right.
on what I've seen that they have found, but we'll see. I think there was a huge amount of stuff there, but I don't think the serious research has been done to actually find the site.
What about over at San Felipe on Santa Anna's Army? Has there been a lot of his stuff found there? I mean, I know there were skirmishes with Mosley Baker's company, and over the years, you've done some research on both sides of the river, if I'm not mistaken there.
I think that there's still a whole lot to be found there.
Good.
We'll leave that up to Sarah since she's in
Sarah.
charge.
I can confirm. I think there is a whole lot to be found, and the hope is that at some point in the not too distant future, we will be able to look in places we haven't been able to look before. So
We did find a description of the location of the Mexican cannon.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yes.
and Sarah tells me she knows where that was.
Oh,
What?
perfect.
Now y'all are putting me on the spot. We're still streaming live to YouTube. Everybody keep their mouths shut.
Yeah.
Texting later.
You can always edit it.
Anybody else have anything else they'd like to ask of Greg?
Nope.
Oh, okay, anybody else? Sarah, you have anything you want to add?
Sorry, I was muted. Nope. I just like to thank Greg very much on behalf of HAS and personally. He always gives a fascinating presentation. I always learn something new, and I get very jealous. So I cannot wait to work with him in the field again. I hope you all, if you have not had an opportunity to be in the field with Greg, I hope you do, because it's pretty fun. And I look forward to the next time he has some fun things to tell us about.
Yep.